Hello and welcome to My Security TV and our Tech and Sec Weekly. My name's Chris Cubbage. I'm the Executive Editor with My Security Media. And today we're going to be speaking to Senator Eric Abetz, the Senator for Tasmania, who on Monday put a call out for a national security summit on cybersecurity. So we took the opportunity to speak to Senator Abetz and get his take on why he felt it was necessary to call for a national summit on cybersecurity. Here is his interview. Senator for Tasmania, the Honourable Eric Abetz, so thank you very much for joining us. You put a release out on Monday. It's time for a cybersecurity summit, and so I appreciate your time coming on. I hadn't heard from you or any announcements previously on cybersecurity, so I thought it was a good opportunity to at least reach out to you and ask why you've called for this summit and maybe the background. But either way, it's good to have a senator at a national level talking about cybersecurity as well. So we welcome the discussions, but what's the background to a release like this on calling for a national summit on cybersecurity?
A very good question. By way of very brief background, under the Howard government, I was Special Minister of State, and during that time I was responsible for a lot of the IT stuff in government. Prior to that, as PALSEC for Defence, I was involved with those who can remember the Y2K issue.
Right.
And so there has been a passing interest in these matters. And I, of course, serve on the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. Now, all that said, recent history, given the COVID closures, the lockdowns in particular, what have we been doing? We've been ordering our food online, working from home, doing all sorts of things that we otherwise wouldn't have been doing, virtual classrooms, talking to our doctor, you name it. And so there's been a lot greater uptake in this space, and therefore there is the greater potential for people to potentially have an adverse experience. And I think we've seen, given some of the evidence, that every 10 minutes one of our businesses in Australia is being attacked, billions of dollars being spent as we speak as a result of the attacks, or businesses trying to defend themselves. And as I understand the situation, and I don't claim to be an expert, but it seems to be me, and I think the government's done a wonderful job, but this is a bit like, I don't know what an appropriate analogy would be, but it's sort of a bit like the ever-receding finishing line. You've never done the job. You always have to look ahead. You always have to think, right, we're secure today, but the nefarious individuals, be they state actors or criminal syndicates, how would they try to break through? And therefore you've always got to be, hopefully, a step, or if not, so one step, preferably 10 steps ahead of those that might seek to attack. And therefore it is an ongoing learning experience for everybody. Government, I think, is doing relatively well in this space, but if you have a look at the attacks and attempted attacks, which were in the Australia Cyber Security Strategy 2020, it was, in the hundreds. The Australian government had over 400 attacks, state governments over 350, huge number of attacks going on all the time. So, in other words, the federal government or the Australian government, one a day. And then, so we can all learn a lot from each other, and bringing everybody together to get the very best of the best, I think, would be a good idea.
Well, the government's passing a range of different legislation, and we actually had Department of Home Affairs on a webinar just recently looking at critical infrastructure protection and cybersecurity as well. We've also got the Australian National Cybersecurity Strategy that came out last year with about $1.67 billion invested over the next 10 years. But the call for a summit sounds like you're not quite satisfied that we are doing enough and we need to up the game a little bit in terms of the communication.
Look, I think we are doing exceptionally well, given from what I can understand the experiences are from elsewhere, albeit, again, don't pretend to be an expert, but I think Australia is doing quite well. in this space. But as I said before, we always have to be reaching out in advance to try to protect ourselves from future attacks, different attacks, more sophisticated attacks. And in those circumstances, bringing the best of the best together in a summit seemed to me to be a good idea, especially in circumstances where differing people, be it from academia, the private sector, etc., would like to have further input. And so having a good discussion, I think, should hurt nobody, should be relatively cheap and easy to run, and getting the best of the heads together, I would have thought, would only benefit everybody.
Now, I've got two. One is I've got naturally a sceptical mind on a talk fest. We do have an industry advisory panel for the national strategy, and then we do have ASD, the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, running the operational side, and now Department of Home Affairs running the policy side. And often from what we hear from the industry side is there's a lack of consultation and even some recent new legislation coming through on surveillance capabilities at a national level as well. I think before the legislation comes through, there is often a lack of consultation with industry, and I think that's one area that a summit might help with. Is there anything specific? There's been a number of sort of industry academic leaders calling for a national resilience plan or a national security plan. Is this something that you would advocate for as well? Because cyber is just one element of a range of different things within a digital economy. Where do you maybe sit at a national security plan or a national resilience plan, and maybe where does cyber fit in that?
Look, very good question. And as an aside, I'm working with some other people on the issue of national resilience and how we might be able to get together all the best people in Australia to ensure national resilience in a whole host of areas. So, without getting sidetracked, do we have the capacity to make sufficient toilet paper or Panadol, or do we have sufficient equipment for repairs to our water and sewage systems in the event international shipping lanes or aeroplanes couldn't come to Australia to fulfil what we are currently reliant on with the supply chain? So national resilience, a big issue generally, and of course within the cyber area, that is a very important question. And look, talk fests, I'm against them. Instinctively, I don't like them. But I think in an area as important as this, and the bureaucracies and our officials are doing a wonderful job. But as I think you indicated earlier, there were three sort of separate areas that I think you mentioned. Trying to bring them all together with the best of people that might feel that they're somewhat on the outside at the moment, I think could only be of benefit. And I am sufficiently optimistic that it wouldn't be just a talk fest, but there would be gleanings to be achieved for all areas of government, for business, for our institutions. Universities are being cyber attacked on a very regular basis, I'm told. And so I think a whole host of endeavours within Australia could benefit from such a summit, but always the danger of a talk fest, and that is why hopefully good sound people, if it were to go ahead, would set the agenda in a manner that it would be practical and of real benefit to the Australian society, the Australian economy.
We used to have a Minister for Cybersecurity under the Turnbull government. Do you think that is required as well at a ministerial level?
That's a very good question, and some of your viewers and others may be aware that I'm not necessarily a fan of former Prime Minister Turnbull, but that aside, I think there was some merit in having specific responsibility, so it was elevated within the ministerial and public service consciousness that the cyber security was something that we really do need to look at. That doesn't take away from those that have responsibility for it and are doing a good job, but I think potentially having that title of cybersecurity might be of very real benefit for the government and just the public consciousness, given the statistics of the attacks that we suffer and the costs to our economy.
Scott Morrison, he did indicate late last year that he was going to reintroduce a Minister for Cybersecurity, but it didn't eventuate. But again, it's one of those things that it does need to be at a high level. In the release, you've written to Minister Dutton, and in that regard, and in terms of your role on the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade Committee as well, you're chair of that, and you mentioned you're on the Parliamentary Joint Committee on Intelligence and Security. At those levels, how much are you hearing? I mean, we normally do get a bit confused on the media releases coming out on cybersecurity. Often it's from Defence or Andrew Hastie as well from the PJCIS. So the communications out of the government on cybersecurity can be a little bit mixed because it's across different portfolios. But how much are you hearing at that level on, say, those two committees that you have involvement with on cybersecurity?
In fairness, the committee that I chair, the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade, not much. In relation to intelligence and security, we do from time to time get briefings, and as you may imagine, I don't want to talk about those briefings. All I feel comfortable in doing is talking about that which is in the public domain, but it would be fair to say that which we are told otherwise than that which is in the public domain would only reinforce my view and not take away from the fact that I think we need to elevate this area of government endeavour. Okay,
well look, all I can do is support the call for cybersecurity to be at a national sort of discussion point and an ongoing basis. I can also ask that the federal government and the bureaucracy continue to engage with us, particularly on things like the webinars and the industry engagement. You can never, sometimes it is a little bit hard if you can feed that back through the engagement with media, and we are here as an advocacy and awareness tool. We're not kind of breaking media as well. So it's one of those mixes between government and industry talking to each other, but it has been positive. And that's my only sort of call on this one in terms of a call for a summit is there's been a lot of discussion. We do have a national strategy, and it kind of indicates that you might be observing that maybe more needs to be done to elevate it because of its importance, which is fair enough to do. So any passing or closing comments, Senator, in terms of this or the time frame maybe for this as well?
Oh, look, I want to simply float the idea and when and how it might happen and the specific agenda. I don't want to be prescriptive in any way. I just thought it was appropriate to float the idea, see what the traction, uptake of it is, and whether we can do something. Because within the Australian society, the Australian body politic, I always get the sense that Australians want to work together, want to collaborate for mutual benefit, and I want to harness that to ensure that we get the very best when it comes to cyber security, because I suppose I have the view, which I'm sure is shared by many, that as we spend, and we are quite rightly spending a lot more on defence, in defence materiel, missiles, ships, you name it, submarines, we also need to be focusing especially on cyber security, because potentially in the future it won't be bullets that are fired to force a country to shut down, but the cyber security attacks that can shut down a water supply, a power supply, and basically neutralise or paralyse a country. And so in those circumstances, I think it's worthwhile to continue to remind government and elevate this issue for public consciousness, but for our academics, business people, small businesses, and the government that make policy and are investing heavily in this area, and as to whether the investment is enough and whether it is appropriately targeted. That said, that is for other people to determine, not for me, because I don't pretend to be an expert, but I am concerned about the issue. And given the positions I hold, it has allowed me to float this idea, and I thank you for the opportunity of floating it with yourself, Chris, and let's see what the uptake is.
Wonderful. Well, look, on that, you only need to go to the Australian Cybersecurity magazine, which we publish, to have a sense of the scope of the attacks, and it is very broad-ranging, from local government, schools, universities and the like, and on critical infrastructure. And this is going to be linked into an alert out from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre just yesterday in the last 20 hours on Microsoft HTML vulnerability. So it's only, you need to look at those alerts. So Senator for Tasmania, the Honourable Eric Abetz, thank you very much for joining us on My Security TV.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Good on you. Thank you.